Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, March 18th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Mo Schwinunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, have you filled out your brackets yet?
I have not, but I am looking forward to it because we are doing a bracket for the Mo News premium account. And so finally I have somewhere to do, it's not fun to do a bracket by yourself. So
No, of course not. Unless, of course, you're one of those hardcore college basketball watchers. You're going to spend all day Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday watching all the games. Of course, your Wolverines are both in the men's and women's bracket again this year. I think 6 seeds or 5 seeds, depending on the men's and women's there. Sadly, my George Washington Revolutionaries, we used to be the Colonials. They renamed themselves Revolutionaries. We haven't been in the tournament for more than a decade, so not holding out hope anytime soon.
I know this, Moshe, because my father, as you know, is a GW alum and is a huge GW basketball fan.
Yeah, not much to cheer for going back a while.
But it's rough, I think.
It's been a rough couple decades. The 90s, we had some good teams there, and then since then, not so much. But I will say this, excited for our second annual bracket. This is available to all premium members. Had a lot of people in it last year. I think after the first round, someone's 4-year-old was in first place. As happens, they chose teams based on the mascot and the colors, which sometimes gets you pretty far based on all the upsets. And then ultimately we had a winner last year. And so this year we will have prizes for the top 3 finishers in the men's and women's bracket that we're doing over there for the premium audience. The winner of the brackets will get a $100 Amazon gift card, as well as a year of Mo News Premium and endless bragging rights. We'll tag you in a post on Instagram. Second place, 1 free year of Mo News Premium. And third place gets $25 of Mo News merch credits, so you can get yourself a mug or a hat, whatever you choose. Reminder, brackets close on Thursday at noon. And you do need to be a Mo News Premium member, which you get a 2-week free trial for. You can join over at mo.news/premium, or as we've told you, mo.news/no-brainer, $9 a month or $100 a year. To join, you get access to weekend news, Q&As, endless enjoyment, and of course, the Mo News March Madness bracket.
Maybe I'll have Alex fill my bracket out.
You should.
That seems to be the trick here.
Just inform her that the lower numbers are technically the better teams or the better seen teams. So don't take too many upsets, young Alex, but that's one strategy there. Reminder, if you're already a Mo News Premium member, you check your inbox. An email went out with the link to the brackets yesterday.
Okay, let's get to the headlines here for our top story today. President Trump's latest showdown with the courts is happening over his administration's immigration efforts. Yesterday, a judge held a hearing demanding answers as to whether the president defied court orders to halt deportations under the Alien Enemies Act.
Yeah, and the Trump administration basically said, we don't need to give you any answers. So this showdown between the courts and the White House continues to escalate.
Also in Washington, the president claims former President Biden's pardons are void because they were signed via Autopen. We'll tell you exactly what this means. In international news, President Trump and Vladimir Putin have a call set for today to talk about a ceasefire to end the war in Ukraine. What are the expectations? To business news, PepsiCo has bought the prebiotic soda brand Poppi for nearly $2 billion. Why Pepsi made the move. Plus, Harvard announces that tuition will be free for families making $200,000 or less.
But your kid still has to get into Harvard first.
So that's the catch. Okay. And in tech news, Apple calls delays on its AI Siri project, quote, ugly and embarrassing.
Yeah, Apple having some difficulty with the whole AI Apple intelligence thing.
And finally, millennial favorite Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy. We'll tell you why. And Moshe is on this day in history.
We'll tell you about the largest art heist in history. Happened on this day in history, and they still haven't recovered the paintings decades later.
All right, President Trump's controversial immigration move over the weekend continues to play out in the courts with a follow-up hearing to the one over the weekend and the judge demanding answers from the Trump administration. So the hearing Monday was meant to determine if President Trump defied this judge's order to halt any deportation efforts under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act on Saturday. That's when nearly 300 illegal immigrants were flown to El Salvador.
And they were flown there despite this judge saying on Saturday, do not deport anyone. And if you have them in the air, please turn the planes around.
During the hearing, federal judge James Boasberg, who was an Obama appointee, said he wanted to know how many planes left the United States on Saturday with migrants headed to El Salvador, where those planes landed, what time they took off and landed, and what authority the government had to remove these people. But the Justice Department lawyer largely refused to answer any of the questions. He kept repeating that the flights to El Salvador on Saturday did not violate the judge's order, which has been the White House's talking point. The judge insisted that this hearing was to learn all of the details about what happened on Saturday. The lawyer reportedly said, "Those are operational issues, and I am not at liberty to provide information."
It was a pretty remarkable hearing, Jill, and it speaks to this standoff of sorts that we're seeing between the White House and the judiciary. We've seen indications of late that the White House, when they don't think the judges have the authority or they don't agree with the judge's rulings, are pushing back on it. So you had this case yesterday where this judge said, hey, what happened to my order from Saturday? Why did these folks get deported? And just the only thing the White House would say was, well, we didn't defy your order. The planes were already outside the U.S., and they also tried to draw this distinction, Jill, by saying, well, Judge, you only said that. You didn't write that down, so we didn't feel we were bound by that. You could sense the frustration from this judge as the hearing proceeded yesterday.
Did you write that down? Because we didn't hear you. Did you say that out loud?
Yeah, and you see, this pushback here from the White House that they believe that they should have more expansive authority. Ultimately in the Constitution, there is Article 1, Congress, Article 2, Executive, Article 3, the courts, checks and balances therein. And what you see here is this push from this White House to both assert itself and its authority over Congress, and also in this case, in the second Trump term, assert itself over the courts.
So on Monday, the Trump administration said that they ignored the judge's orders because the deportees were already on a flight over international waters, so his ruling didn't apply.
The judge pushed back on that, being like, no, my authority still applied there, even if the planes were beyond U.S. borders. So this is really shaping up to be an interesting fight.
Some background here for anyone who is just learning about this story. We did cover it on yesterday's podcast, but we know you can't listen every day. So this all started Saturday after the president invoked the Alien Enemies Act in order to deport 261 detainees, many of whom the administration claims are connected to the violent Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. The Alien Enemies Act was passed in 1798, and it gives the president broad authority to deport non-citizens during wartime without going through immigration courts, judges, or legal proceedings. And President Trump here has declared that the Tren de Aragua gang is invading the United States, giving him what he believes is the authority to invoke the law. He did that on Saturday, right before deporting that plane full of migrants to El Salvador. And that very same day, a judge heard a lawsuit on the law and called on the administration to pause the deportations under the Alien Enemies Act until he could decide if it's constitutional. As we have told you, despite the judge's orders, 261 detainees were sent to prisons in El Salvador that night.
Yeah, so it appears here the White House is going off a technicality, being like, well, your order wasn't issued before the planes took off, and so therefore we were not bound by you, and the planes were already over U.S. borders. There's been talk that literally the planes took off while the hearing was taking place, potentially anticipating this, Jill. So you have the administration here defending their actions, and they're getting very aggressive with their rhetoric. The Attorney General Pam Bondi saying the judge is siding with terrorists over the safety of Americans. What we do know is that the White House is claiming they arrested these folks, arguing that all of them are here illegally. We don't have specifics and names and details here. That's actually what the judge was asking for, and the administration said, we don't have to tell you any of this stuff besides that we didn't defy your order. So we are awaiting more details from the judge here. There will be more hearings on all of this as this fight escalates. Now, critics of the Alien Enemies Act argue that we're not technically in a state of war right now. The Trump administration argues, no, we are in a state of war. The number of illegals who've come across the border, including gang members from Venezuela, are tantamount to an act of war here and an invasion of U.S. borders. You have a constitutional battle unfolding here. This does highlight the tensions between the executive and the judiciary. It's notable here, Jill, as we were watching these proceedings take place yesterday, the Justice Department actually filed papers on Monday afternoon before this hearing saying, hey, cancel the hearing. We were cool. Everything was kosher. You don't need to have this hearing. The judge was like, no, we're going to have this hearing you guys need to explain yourselves to me. And it appears here the White House increasingly doesn't feel they need to explain themselves. They've actually filed paperwork. They want this judge thrown off this case because of the fact that they see him as a liberal judge who was put on the bench by Obama. And keep in mind that our federal bench, they're appointed by various presidents, right? We have Reagan appointees, we have Bush appointees, we have Trump appointees, Biden appointees, et cetera. And they're supposed to rule on the law regardless of, who put them there. Now, we will see here these arguments. You are seeing Trump allies on Capitol Hill back up the president when it comes to saying that, the judge has no authority on some of these matters. And that's ultimately our checks and balances system, right? You have the judiciary, you have Congress, and the feeling increasingly from Democrats is without congressional Republicans who are in charge of the House and Senate doing much in the way of oversight, they are increasingly depending on the judiciary branch here and judges to potentially call out the president when they feel that he isn't doing something that is constitutional. On Fox on Monday, meanwhile, Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said they're not stopping deportations, even though the judge has ordered a temporary halt. Homan saying this simply, I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming. So, Jill, a really remarkable string of events here related to this case. And ultimately, we're going to see as the thing escalates to the Supreme Court, what comes of it and how the White House reacts.
All right, sticking with politics, remember those last-minute preemptive pardons that President Biden issued to his family members and some members of the January 6th committee? Well, President Trump says that they are unenforceable. He posted Monday on Truth Social that the pardons were signed with an Autopen instead of a physical pen and were, quote, void and therefore unenforceable. He claims that by using an Autopen, which is a device that mechanically reproduces a person's signature, Biden did not personally authorize the pardons for lawmakers on that January 6th committee. During one of his final acts in office, he claimed Biden probably didn't know that the pardons were being signed and that someone else likely did it. The Conservative Heritage Foundation has made similar claims based on evidence that several Biden documents have virtually identical signatures. Autopens, by the way, have been used by former presidents for decades, given that they do sign a huge amount of documents.
Yeah, so this speaks to two things. One, taking issue with the Autopen, which, as you noted, has been used for decades. It goes back to Thomas Jefferson. He had a version of it that was invented 200 years ago. In terms of modern times, the modern Autopen, President Harry Truman was the first one in the modern era to use it. JFK used it for the majority of the things that he signed. Reagan apparently was using it on a number of things. George W. Bush actually sought legal counsel, his Justice Department, hey, is this legal for me to do? And they said yes. Obama was the first one to use an Autopen to sign a bill into law. Trump also used it a couple dozen times in his first term. So as far as the Autopen, there's that. Then you have Trump's argument that, actually Biden had no idea what was going on, that it was somebody else directing the Autopen here as far as the pardons. Now, Trump hasn't provided any evidence of that, besides the fact that you've heard from Trump that, he believes that Biden wasn't really there. And so he's making this claim, again, came out around midnight Sunday into Monday, and we'll await more evidence there. Reporters did ask the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about it on Monday, and she said, hey, you guys are reporters, go report, go dig into this. So basically admitting they have no evidence of that. You guys figure it out.
At the core of the dispute, though, are the all-powerful presidential pardons. No U.S. president has ever tried to declare that his predecessor's pardons were void. It is a very unique power to U.S. presidents under the Constitution, and courts have been pretty reluctant to limit that authority. There hasn't been any specificity on what type of pen must be used, if any at all, to sign pardons. Even more, a federal appeals court last year said that a presidential pardon doesn't even have to be in writing. On January 20th, Inauguration Day, just hours before leaving office, Biden announced the pardons of General Mark Milley, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the members of Congress and staff who served on the Select Committee, and also U.S. Capitol and D.C. Metropolitan Police officers who testified before the Select Committee. So this was just as he was leaving office. Again, several members of Biden's family also received preemptive pardons.
Yeah, some of these, we learned about it literally like 11:50, 11:55, as Trump was just moments away from taking the oath of office. A number of those members of Congress, Biden was worried might be targeted by the Trump administration, so he issued those pardons, those very blanket pardons, pretty unprecedented in terms of the authority they're taking pardon power to the next level, receiving a lot of criticism from Democrats for that, I should say. Nonetheless, you did have Trump saying over the weekend, it'll be up to a court to determine if the pardons are void here. He's just throwing it out there. Adam Schiff, a senator now from California, who received one of these pardons, said that threats will not intimidate us. Adam Kinzinger, a former Republican congressman turned Trump critic, posted on social media, "Bring it on," with a word that rhymes with which. In terms of his response to Trump there, bring it on. Anyway, we'll keep it family friendly on this podcast. As again, for the argument here from Trump that Biden had no idea what was going on, we're awaiting a statement from the Biden office as to whether any of that is true. I cannot imagine, Jill, that we'll get a statement anytime soon from Biden's team being like, oh yeah, he had no idea what was happening. He didn't actually pardon those people. You are right, Donald. I had no clue. So I don't expect
What are they alleging?
Statement.
That somebody just put it in his hand, or that somebody else did it?
That literally he wasn't in the office, and that somebody used the Autopen with his signature to make those pardons, unbeknownst to Joe Biden.
What I do think is really interesting is that it does show that the Trump administration would be looking to perhaps take legal action against members of that January 6th committee, or perhaps members of President Biden's family.
Oh, yeah, he wants at him. I mean, late on Monday, he took away Secret Service protection for Hunter Biden and other Biden children. By the way, typically, and this included the Trump children after his first term, you get Secret Service protection as a child of a president for 6 months after your parent is president. And Trump decided to revoke that yesterday. So he's still thinking about the Bidens a lot, it appears.
All right, time for the speed read. Let's start with a major international story that we're watching today from the Washington Post. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are scheduled for a phone call today to talk about plans for a ceasefire agreement to end the ongoing Ukraine war that started when Russia invaded the country back in 2022. President Trump said the two leaders will discuss, quote, dividing up certain assets as part of the deal. They're expected to discuss territorial concessions by Ukraine, as Russia currently occupies about 20% of the country. Ukrainian officials have insisted that Russia give back all of its territory as part of the agreement. Trump has acknowledged that that's probably not going to happen, and that Ukraine should have to get their head around giving up at least part of the country that Russia invaded and has taken control of. President Trump also mentioned that he'll be talking to Putin about control of strategic infrastructure, including a nuclear power plant. Russia currently occupies a Ukrainian nuclear plant, which is the largest in Europe. The conversation between Trump and Putin had been talked about for weeks, and it follows those negotiations we told you about, led by the United States and Saudi Arabia, where a 30-day ceasefire proposal was presented. Ukraine accepted that deal last week, which has led the U.S. to resume military and intelligence support for Kyiv. Russia initially expressed reservations about the ceasefire plan and then proposed its own conditions. So Moscow is demanding that Ukraine never become part of NATO, that Russia keep control of all of the Ukrainian territory it seized, and that Ukraine refrain from rearming its military during the ceasefire period.
Yeah, he also wants the West to ease sanctions on him. He's got a whole bunch of demands, Putin does, after launching this war more than 3 years ago. Now, Trump says he does expect there to be some sort of deal here within the coming weeks. And Putin has put forth demands that Ukraine will never agree to. And one thing Ukraine wants, that it's desperately seeking, is security guarantees. They've been invaded twice now by Putin in a decade. There was also an ongoing war for a number of years there that Russia was basically supporting in the eastern provinces that have a large number of Russians in them. And so Ukraine's saying, hey, listen, we'll sign a deal here if this means an end to the war forever. But we don't want a situation where Putin takes a year or two to rearm here and then invades us again. He continues to claim that our entire country is his. And so where's our support? And so this Putin argument that there will be no Western peacekeepers and Ukraine will never join NATO and Ukraine can't work on its defenses basically is a non-starter for Ukraine being like, no, that's not how this works because we can't agree to basically ensure our own destruction in the coming years. We should note, by the way, Ukraine also has 3 million citizens who currently live under Russian occupation on the territory that Russia has taken. It's an area about the size of Pennsylvania. And you also have war crimes that are being investigated Russians taking tens of thousands of Ukrainian children across the border into Russia. And so there are a lot of concerns there the Ukrainians have. The French and the Brits have said, we will provide security support for Ukraine moving forward here. The Russians have said, no, that's not happening either. So they're going to have to come to some sort of compromise here. We'll see where Trump lands on this, where he's able to push on Putin. It seems like he's the voice in the West who's able to work with Putin, who's saying that he'll work with Putin here, whereas most of Western Europe is mainly on the Ukrainian side here and has no intention of negotiating with Putin. They feel that he burned them many times. Staying with this, Jill, slightly more lighthearted headline here. A French politician said over the weekend that they want the Statue of Liberty back. And this, of course, is connected to Ukraine because they feel that the U.S. dropping support here for Ukraine or not being as supportive of Ukraine and sort of hedging their bets with Russia means that they no longer stand for what the Statue of Liberty stands for. And so one French politician, a far-left politician, we should note this is not the French government here, says, we gave you that Statue of Liberty more than 150 years ago. We want it back now because you don't represent what we thought anymore.
Moshe, the 1880s called. They want their statue back.
They want their statue back. It came in 350 different parts, shipped across the ocean. This was a gift from the French to America on our 100th birthday for 1876, but took a while to get funding. Eventually gets put together. It arrives in New York Harbor in 1885. And so it's been there for a while, as we know. That French politician says, you despise her. She'll be happy here with us. If you've ever been to Paris, by the way, there's a lot of copies of the Statue of Liberty. The artist who created it created many versions of it, and then there were copies created afterwards. Not surprisingly, this came up at the White House briefing yesterday. Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, was asked, are we going to give back the Statue of Liberty? Here was her answer.
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country.
So Caroline Leavitt going with the World War II pushback there. Jill, you'd be speaking German if it wasn't for us, you French. So we're going to keep the statue.
It's not a bad response.
It's not inaccurate, but they went with fighting words. Not surprising for this White House.
Okay, to some business news from CNBC. A big soda acquisition. Pepsi said on Monday that it is buying Poppi, the prebiotic soda brand, for nearly $2 billion. Prebiotic sodas have become very popular among more health-conscious consumers in the past few years, as soda consumption has been falling in the past 2 decades. Coca-Cola recently launched its own prebiotic soda called Simply Pop, and Pepsi was reportedly trying to launch its own, but then canceled those plans after internal evaluations suggested that it might not succeed. So instead, Pepsi will now be able to tap into Poppi's established market presence and consumer base. In 2023, Poppi's annual sales reportedly crossed 100 million just 5 years after it launched. This year was its second straight year of having an ad during the Super Bowl, just showing how big this brand has gotten and how deep its pockets are. The companies have not said when this deal is expected to close, and there are still regulatory hurdles to get through before it is finalized.
Amazing story, Poppi, by the way, started by a husband-wife team in Texas, Stephen and Allison Ellsworth. You might remember or might have seen clips from the Shark Tank episode where they actually got an investment from Rohan Oza over on Shark Tank in 2018, and at the time, Jill, they were trying to sell 25% of their company for $400,000, meaning the company was valued at, in their eyes, or in the investors' eyes there, $1.6 million company. Several years later, it is now a $2 billion company. Remarkable what they've built here, and one of the largest success stories from Shark Tank. I mean, so significant, so big here that even Pepsi was like, you know what? I don't know that we'll be able to compete with our own brand. Let's just buy them. It's just the latest acquisition by Pepsi as it looks to get into the more healthy-ish market and follow consumer habits. They recently acquired Siete Chips. They have 100% stake now in Sabra, the hummus brand, as they're looking to adapt here.
That's a very Meta/Facebook move. They bought Instagram. I mean, a lot of companies do it.
A lot of companies, which is like, do we build our own competitor to this, or do we just buy up the leader in the market or one of the leaders in the market? And so strategically, they've done that. That's why, we mentioned the regulatory hurdles, but I don't know whether competitively, especially given the deregulation the Trump administration is focused on here, whether there'll be any impediments to this acquisition.
Better to just go with something that works.
The consumers know it, and selling your own version of it might be challenging.
From ABC News, Harvard University announced that tuition will be free for students from families that earn up to $200,000 a year. This change begins as soon as the 2025-2026 academic year. So for families that earn less than $100,000, Harvard will cover more than just tuition. They'll also cover housing, food, health services, and other student services. Harvard's president saying, quote, putting Harvard within financial reach for more individuals widens the array of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives that all of our students encounter. The new policy is expected to enable about 86% of U.S. families to be eligible for some form of financial aid from Harvard. According to Harvard's website, the average tuition for an undergrad is about $56,000 a year, but the costs could be up to about $83,000 when you add in housing, food, health services, and other stuff.
So there's about 25,000 undergrads at Harvard. Just over half of them receive some sort of financial aid here. As I mentioned at the top, the challenge is getting into Harvard, of course. But ultimately here, Harvard has decided to offer more financial support to a number of students here. Their incoming freshman class, typically around 2,000 kids or just under that. There is some economic uncertainty, though, for Harvard, as we have told you about other universities, as the Trump administration has either frozen funding or threatened to freeze funding unless it meets certain standards when it comes to a variety of things like fighting anti-Semitism and continuing to take apart anything that was remotely related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And now for some tech news from Bloomberg. Things aren't looking so good for Apple right now when it comes to the AI race. The company promised big AI upgrades for its voice assistant Siri under its Apple Intelligence Initiative. But now those features are delayed at least until 2026, if not indefinitely. Meanwhile, the competition certainly isn't slowing down. Google's rolling out its Gemini AI. Amazon is making Alexa smarter. And Apple has still yet to catch up with its own AI technology. So we've told you about this company. It had promised that its new tech would make Siri, which was first introduced in 2011, a better assistant. She, if we're calling her a she, would be able to tap into users' personal data to better respond to questions. But at Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference this past summer, the company barely had a working prototype to show off. Last month, Bloomberg reported that Apple was struggling with bugs and engineering problems. Critics say Apple made big promises about AI and it just can't deliver, at least not yet.
Yeah, apparently they're saying there was a big all-hands meeting for the Siri division at Apple. And at that meeting, one of the senior directors called the delays here ugly and embarrassing. They're still not sure when the enhancements will actually launch. They confirmed earlier this month that enhanced Siri was taking longer than expected. With delivery times up in the air, Apple has actually now taken down a video of their ad last year touting Siri's new AI features. As of Friday, though, as of late last week, Apple says they're not firing anyone over this crisis. But this is especially concerning since, Apple was like one of the first to the market with Siri, this, virtual helper. It just hasn't gotten much better over the years. And all these AI companies are crushing it. So a lot of concern in Cupertino at headquarters there.
And another business story, this from Reuters. A sad day for so many millennials. Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy for the second time in 6 years. Forever 21 said it plans to shut down all of its U.S. operations, including about 350 stores around the country. Liquidation sales are already underway. The company is citing mounting online competition in the fast fashion sector and also weak mall traffic. Forever 21, a staple for those of us that frequented malls in the early 2000s. It appealed to young women with designer styles at super affordable prices. At its peak, it was reportedly making $4 billion in yearly sales. It employed more than 40,000 people around the world. Forever 21 previously filed for bankruptcy back in 2019, but it did manage to stay afloat after closing 30% of its stores. It was also bought by Spark Group, a subsidiary of Spark. Authentic Brands will continue to own Forever 21's trademark and intellectual property, which means that the brand could live on in some form, but unclear what it's going to look like.
So it went for bankruptcy once. They tried to revive it. This time, they've gone for bankruptcy again, and this time it appears to be for real. Jill, what we thought was Forever 21, not so forever in 2025.
I feel like all of the late night hosts are going to be doing some version of that.
There's some version of it. You mentioned Authentic Brands, which owned it. They also own brands like Aeropostale, Brooks Brothers, Eddie Bauer. Basically, as you walk through a mall, a number of the retailers. Now, notably, the Authentic Brand CEO said that acquiring Forever 21, probably his biggest mistake. They weren't able to turn things around. One of the things they cite is all of the online retailers like Temu and Shein. It has been talk in the Trump administration of having tariffs on some of those Chinese brands. They have had exceptions for them, but it's going to be too late here for Forever 21.
Right, if they hung on just a little bit longer.
If they just held on, actually, I should note, a number of you mentioned that while Forever 21's clothes sort of infamously were known to basically be one or two wears and then they would shrink or fall apart, some of you have clothes. I think my wife, Alex, says she's got some Forever 21 stuff that has lasted her years.
I think Zara, which is what I'm kind of obsessed with, is maybe one step above Forever 21. But I have Zara stuff that has lasted for years also. And I'm like, I thought this stuff wasn't supposed to last. I'm not complaining, by the way.
It's all fast fashion. It's all versions of stuff, right, that comes from abroad. Is super cheap. People have many issues with that, right? Ethically speaking, climate speaking. Nonetheless, it does not appear here that Forever 21 was able to pivot their brand to Gen Z, similar to like Abercrombie, right? Which is a completely different price point, but ultimately they found a way to both appeal to millennials, those of us back in the 90s, and have found a way to revive themselves as a brand. Not so much for Forever 21. R.I.P. All right, now time for On This Day in History. Speaking of brands that have actually lasted for a while, on this day in history, March 18th, 1852 in New York, a man named Henry Wells and a man named William Fargo, if you know where I'm going with this, with several other investors, launched their bank, Wells Fargo. The discovery of gold in California in the late 1840s prompted a huge spike in cross-country shipping, so they decided to take advantage of those opportunities. They got very much into shipping. If you remember the Music Man song, the Wells Fargo wagon is a coming to... Anyway, there's a reference in Music Man, the Wells Fargo wagon. Of course, they would get into more of the banking, financial side of things in the early 20th century, and that's where we know them today. Jill, I performed in Music Man in my high school. I don't remember all the lyrics, though.
Is Music Man the one he's a music man and he sells clarinets to the kids in the town with the big trombones and the rat-a-tat drums?
Yeah, and 76 trombones.
Yes, okay.
All of that, John Philip Sousa, etc., etc. All right, we continue here with On This Day in History. In 1942, on this day, the infamous executive order signed by President Franklin Roosevelt authorizing the internment camps of Japanese Americans during World War II. Among the acts that he actually cited for that, the Alien Enemies Act, the aforementioned Alien Enemies Act, that Trump is citing for different reasons. Now to the story I teased at the top. On this day in 1990, in what was considered the world's biggest art heist, and still I believe is monetarily wise in history, two men pretending to be police officers stole 13 paintings, including a Rembrandt, Vermeer, from a museum in Boston, the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Jill, 35 years later, the stolen art has yet to be recovered, value $500 million. A cell phone history for you on this day in 1999, 26 years ago. The Nokia 3210 mobile phone, that little Nokia that many of us had pre-installed with Snake, hit the market. These were those Nokias, Jill, that you could drop out of your pocket, fall anywhere, and unbreakable.
Unlike my current iPhone that has 17 cracks in the screen that I've yet to get replaced.
That literally costs $1,000 more and is like much more susceptible. But of course, does a few more things than Nokia did back in the day.
Except that one person who dropped it from an airplane and it didn't break.
Right, and the phone didn't break. The one that fell out of that Alaska jet last year.
Oh, still need to find out what case that was.
We end here with a bit of music history. The Commodores released their song Easy 48 years ago today, March 18th, 1977. The Commodores, of course, introduced us to a very young Lionel Richie. And 40 years ago today, sort of the de facto theme of this podcast, though it's not the theme because we haven't bought the rights to it. Tears for Fears, released on this day in 1985. Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
And you're saying it's the theme to the podcast because all of the news that we cover is just about
it's just a bunch of people who want to rule the world, either in business or politics or sports.
Not us, of course. We're just happy.
We want to rule the podcast world, Jill.
We do. Which means please recommend us. Tell your friends about us. That brings us actually to the end of this podcast. Thank you guys for listening, of course, to the Mo News podcast. And really, it helps us because we don't do advertising for the podcast. It's truly just word of mouth. So Spread the love. We'd appreciate it.
And please on Instagram to listen. But we're growing over time here. Thanks to all of you who are listening. And
please listen to the podcast. We actually don't make major pleas on Instagram. We just post the links, really.
All right, everyone. Go fill out your brackets.
Mosh just took his end of podcast mint. So that means we're done, people.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.